Voila! Here I am. What a surprise show on a Wednesday. What can you do, guys? We actually keep our promises. It's not like those presidential campaign promises. Promises made, promises kept, and they were never kept. Instead, I told you, if a sponsor or more than one sponsor will help us out, we will be with you for an extra show. And this is the extra show, my dear friends. Maybe I'm in a more relaxed mode because it's Wednesday, but in reality, this is a very important show with a lot of interesting information. So let's thank our sponsors, first of all. Okay, so let's thank our sponsors and let's start this show. I want to thank, first of all the people who purchased my latest books, even my oldest ones. And then I want to thank Larry Frascella, Daniel Estes, and Elizabeth Oxler. And we usually like to thank our sponsor with our vintage lo-fi applause. Here it is. Thanks to our sponsors, we're here on a Wednesday. I couldn't put my tie on, so I'm in a more relaxed, almost 70s vibe with this shirt. Okay, so here we are, thanks to Larry Frascella, Daniel Estes, and Elizabeth Oxler. And here we are talking about a very important topic. For those who don't know what the Dark Enlightenment is, let's present it to our audience in a nutshell, so at least you get, the concept of it, and then we will dig far, far deeper.
The Dark Enlightenment is a political and philosophical movement that challenges some of the foundational ideas of modern society. The term itself was popularized by British philosopher Nick Land in the early 2010s, but the roots go deeper. The core ideas were first developed by American tech theorist Curtis Yarvin, writing under the pseudonym Mencius Moldbug, starting around 2007. Through his influential blog, Unqualified Reservations, Yarvin laid out a radical critique of democracy, liberalism, and the modern state, proposing instead a return to centralized, hierarchical governance modeled on corporate systems. Yarvin's central argument is that modern civilization, especially in the West, has been steered into stagnation and decline by a rigid, overly idealistic belief in egalitarianism and mass participation. According to this view, democracy is not the pinnacle of political evolution. It is a system that masks inefficiency, encourages manipulation, and creates the illusion of choice without any real control. Yarvin introduced the idea of neo-cameralism, a political model in which a nation-state functions like a joint stock corporation, run by a CEO accountable only for performance, not popularity. In this model, the government is not elected but managed, like a business. To many, it sounds dystopian. To others, it sounds like a brutally honest assessment of how things already work behind the curtain. This worldview also gave rise to one of Yarvin's most infamous concepts, the cathedral. In his framework, the cathedral refers to the intertwined network of elite institutions including media, academia, and bureaucracy that shape cultural and political narrative.
Sounds a little bit like the infamous deep state. So is this new movement a good thing or a bad thing? Sadly, it's a bad thing. Dark matter, Gothic matter, and Dark Enlightenment all connect with the Silicon Valley's new idea of making Cyber Satan and the coming of the Antichrist almost cool. Now, let's introduce the whole concept of today's show because, like I said, it's very relevant. All the tech bros that invited DC since the November 2024 election are undoubtedly technocrats. A concept I've discussed very much, especially in volume 7 of my Confessions, which is a very relevant book to today's show. But there is also other books which I will be citing from the Cyber Satan trilogy. So these unelected, unaccountable people became part of Trump's entourage. Most Americans have never heard of people like David Sachs, Thomas Shedd, Lynn Parker, Emil Michael, or Alexei Bulazem, all of whom are technocrats. There are many more that you'll never know about because their names are hidden behind the wall of national security. But one of them is definitely one of the fathers of the Dark Enlightenment, which we'll be discussing today. In my book, Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 9, 7 Steps to the Secrets of the New World Disorder, it talked about how this, there are many fictional imaginings, or let's say, not prophecies, but depiction of this dystopian future that are known, of course, but I will highly recommend, like I said in Volume 9, a French New Wave film called Alphaville. I know, guys, it's an obscure old movie. Probably most of you say, I don't want to see an old movie like that. It's a very interesting movie, though. It inspired, by the way, also that famous German synth pop band from the 1980s that seems so innocent now, like Forever Young or big in Japan. But in reality, Alphaville had also an occult connotation. They dedicated one of their tracks, like I explained in Volume 8 of my Confessions, to Rose Kelly, who was Aleister Crowley's wife. But aside from that, Alphaville, it's a movie of the legendary Jean-Luc Godard. And this movie is, I'm going to summarize it briefly for you, is about a secret agent, a US secret agent, who has been sent to a distant space city of Alphaville when because he has to search for a missing person. And he arrives in this city where there is a tyrannical ruler which has this sentient computer named Alpha 60 that bans emotions, poetry, and free thought. So already that should give you an idea of the concept around this interesting film. In volume 9, which is also the last book of my trilogy dedicated to Cyber Satan, which includes volume 6.66, volume 7, I focus on the future dangers also of quantum computing, because the high cost of quantum computing hardware and the complexity of quantum computing algorithms are among the key factors in bringing us towards the establishment of what I described as techno-feudalism, which is, of course, techno-authoritarianism, where these tech billionaires control the digital and physical infrastructure of society, from their bunkers or from their cities. That is one of the concepts that we find in the Dark Enlightenment, which is kind of disturbing to us and to everybody, because the Dark Enlightenment is very elitarian. And Curtis Yarvin, who is one of the creators of this movement, has basically pushed for the idea of something that not only opposes democracy, but also the idea of a president who is just a national CEO and a dictator. He seems to be eager to promote himself as a royalist, a monarchist, a Jacobite. And that's okay. I mean, I have monarchist sympathies myself. Of course, I come from an aristocratic and even royal background. But the way he does it, and I'm going to focus on it by sharing some of his views with some of the clips that we have of this guy, who is also about having a network of private cities of bankers that become involved the moment in which this in this whole society inevitably collapses to the Dark Enlightenment that they are proposing. Now, why is this so important? Why am I talking about Dark Enlightenment? Guys, only the other day, the Pentagon has signed a deal with the Palantir AI. So, the Pentagon, just to give you an idea. Now, we have seen since Trump's inauguration these techno-brainiacs that have not only constructed a new crypto-centric financial system, which, of course, has brought a lot of money to, amongst other things, also Trump's own family. I mean, we're talking billions. But also ushered in AI to run major section of the administration in question, influencing legislation and executive orders to deregulate the AI, hamstring the states from interfering. Betraying MAGA. MAGA becomes almost, I mean, MAGA for these people is starting to be like the useful idiots of the situation. And I'm sorry to say that, because I was MAGA. Probably you were MAGA, and we were definitely America first. So this betrayal of Trump's campaign promises is evident when they are instead ushering in techno-authoritarianism. This was, by the way, all done in the light of what is known as accelerationism within the framework of the Dark Enlightenment, because there is also this a sideshow known as accelerationism. A bit difficult to spell, I tell you the truth. My wife sometimes says that I spell things wrong, so I would like to correct myself on the previous spellings of Baba, which I said I call Booba, and coherent, which I said coherent. You have to forgive me, guys. At times I'm a little bit of an off-the-boat American, and so my pronunciation is not always the best, but I try to I try to make up for it, let's say, okay, with my information, which, by the way, is unique information, which I try to vehicle here on this show, which now, as you can see, thanks to our sponsor, has also an extra weekly show. I don't know for how long, but if you help us out with GoFundMe or with Cash App, you can find the Cash App handle at riozagami.com, we will be able to bring you more shows every week. Anyway, techno-authoritarianism, Dark Enlightenment, which is also known as Neo-Reactionary Movement, or NRX. They have also an acronym for this Dark Enlightenment, NRX. Is about a radical shift in political philosophy that is emerging from the Silicon Valley circles. This worldview rejects liberal democracy, which, I mean, I can agree with that part of it. But as we will move on, you will see there is something sinister about this partial rejection of the Antichrist. Let's call it a eschatological error also on their side. However, they reject liberal democracy in favor of a hierarchical corporate-style governance led by technocratic elites. New elites. A new aristocracy. That's what the creators are implying here. The Dark Enlightenment is, I repeat, an anti-democratic, anti-egalitarian movement which views what was promoted during the Enlightenment as something wrong, a mistake. Now, there were a lot of things that were promoting during the Enlightenment era, which I also regard as a mistake, because there is definitely a tendency also to push that monstrosity then called communism. The Philosophie Sociale, that, by the way, was initiated by Moses Dobruska, who was the son of Jacob Frank's cousin, was part of that mistake in a way, in the way it evolved, let's say. I mean, concepts at times can be okay in theory, but not in practice. That happened also when the Soviet Union experimented communism. And then, of course, they rejected it with the Russian Federation after the fall of the Soviet Union, but they still kept certain elements. However, in the light of the Dark Enlightenment movement, people like Curtis Yarvin, who is regarded as one of the fathers, as well as the British philosopher Nick Land, see this whole all the ideas promoted by the Enlightenment as a mistake that leads to social decay and inefficiency. And like I said, we can also partially agree with some of these views. I mean, there is definitely some positive elements in Illuminism, and there might be also some positive elements in Dark Illuminism, which reject Illuminism. However, it seems like we can never really find a balance. It's like always leaning on the wrong side. Things are always leaning towards evil. The movement, the Dark Enlightenment movement, has been pioneered by this Curtis Yarvin. It's very important that you keep in mind this guy, because this guy is not a normal guy. He wrote for many years under a nickname Mencius Modbug. Kind of nickname. And he conducted himself in the creation of this new movement with a guy called Nick Land. Now, Nick Land, who is best known for popularizing the ideology of accelerationism, which is a range of ideologies that call for the use of capitalism and associated processes to create radical social transformations, regardless of those transformations, seems though, and I mean, Nick Land is one of the co-founders of this Dark Enlightenment. he is really interested in promoting the Atomwaffen affiliated to the theistic Satanist organization Order of the Nine Angles. Now, guys, I've always warned you about the Order of the Nine Angles. I've extensively wrote about them in Confessions of an Illuminati Volume 5, which is a very important book. Here it is, in which I explain the dangers of the Orders of the Nine Angles. Instead, this guy is actually saying that their work is highly recommended. So imagine that, highly recommended. So this rise of technocracy seems to already have some really big satanic connections. Then let's talk about this guy, Curtis Yarvin. Let's talk about him, because he's no ordinary guy. He comes from a Sabbatean Frankist background. Curtis Yarvin, who has been described as a neo-reactionary, a neo-monarchist, a neo-feudalist, and who sees liberalism as creating a matrix-like totalitarian system, and wants to replace American democracy with a sort of techno-monarchy, was born into an Ashkenazi Jewish family from Brooklyn with Sabbatean Frankist roots. The prominent writer and blogger Curtis Yarvin has publicly described his paternal grandparents as Jewish communists from Brooklyn. He has indicated his Ashkenazi background according to both Wikipedia and the New Yorker. He's been very careful, though, to avoid mentioning the Sabbatean roots of his rich Jewish families from Ukraine and Russia. A dangerous heresy, the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, which I have, of course, explained in great detail in my latest book, which I thank you for purchasing and for making a bestseller. I mean, The Rise and Fall of Frankist Monster is currently a bestseller, thanks to you. Thank you so much for that. This guy, Curtis Yarvin, is another manifestation of the Sabbatean Frankist heresy, just like Jeffrey Epstein. Also almost from the same side of town. No wonder Peter Thiel, whose family, as I explained in the Rise and Fall of Frankist Monster, is from Frankfurt, and was heavily involved with the Sabbatean Frankists historically. And I stated that in my book. Why I'm saying no wonder? Because he has become a major investor and supporter of Yarvin's technological and political ideas. Peter Thiel, who basically we have seen recently also in Rome creating all that fuss because of his conferences on the Antichrist and so on. Thiel has become a major investor and supporter of Yarvin's technological and political ideas. I mean, major supporter, giving him millions. Thiel, like I said, was connected here. I said it, of course, and I showed why they are connected with Jeffrey Epstein. Peter Thiel has described Yarvin, this Sabbatean Frankist, as an interesting and powerful thinker. And the two have maintained a very close intellectual relationship in recent years that has really influenced, especially during the period of the pandemic, a good chunk of Silicon Valley's political philosophy. Now, Peter Thiel sees himself as part of this dark enlightenment. So inevitably, the Antichrist he views is part of his dark enlightenment view. Peter Peter Thiel ties, in fact, the Dark Enlightenment or the neo-reactionary movement, if you want to call it that way, by framing all the modern bureaucratic, globalist, and pro-regulation forces as seductive totalitarian forces, and a system that is, for him, totalitarian, that promises peace and safety while initiating the end of technological progress and human freedom. Well, I really don't understand Peter Thiel because, like I said, a couple of days ago, he signed a deal with Palantir, with the Pentagon. He is part of the problem. He's not part of the solution. So this guy, but we're going to talk about that. He has really promoted an eschatological error for a reason. And I'm going to also dig deep into that. In summary, Peter Thiel uses the Antichrist imagery to frame the struggle for the future as one between a stagnant, regulated, globalist one-world government, which he calls the Antichrist, and the alternative, which is a fast-paced, tech-driven, often chaotic, and non-democratic future, which is part of this accelerated Dark Enlightenment view. But as also pointed out by Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher that we talked about in relation also to Vladimir Putin, is called the Rasputin of Putin and so on. But Dugin says that Peter Thiel is reducing the Antichrist only to left liberal globalism. That means, in Dugin's words, world government, Soros, Greta Thunberg. Now, I agree partially with the whole thing, but that is, like Dugin said, is clearly only a part of the truth. I mean, even myself, I said that Greta Thunberg was an Antichrist in Volume 4 of my confession. So I agree with that. I agree that Soros, who is another Sabbatean Frankist, is also part of the problem. And of course, I agree that their idea of world government, United Nations, and so on, is all part of a Antichrist helping way of doing things, because they will help in the rise of the Antichrist for sure. But it seems like this is also an attempt to cover up the demonic role, their own demonic role, of the Dark Enlightenment milieu in the rise of the Antichrist and Cyber Satan. It's almost like saying, you know, you are the Antichrist because you are a leftist, but then if you act as the Antichrist and you are on the right, then you are right. It's not really... No, not really coherent. Let's say. I said it well. I said coherent. So this wrongful interpretation, this eschatological error, as Dugin said, is also in Peter Thiel's interpretation of the kateon, which means in Greek the withholding or restrainer, which is an important theological and political concept which we derive from Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. But Thiel identifies then, you know, everything that he does with AI, robotics, high tech as the post-liberal acceleration, the way to save us from the Antichrist, when it's just part of the rise of the Antichrist. And I said that for many years, that the Antichrist will be aided by Cyber Satan, so he will be aided by artificial intelligence, robotics, and high tech. Because in Dugin's words, Cateonic Russia is fighting against the global government. But Thiel's project, like Dugin also says, is not the alternative. It's part of the same Antichrist. However, even if I agree with Dugin, I have a problem with the fact that Russia has an alliance with China, because China's governance model has been often described as techno-authoritarianism. And it's just one step from the Dark Enlightenment. It's just like, Xi Jinping is the head of the Communist Party rather than simply being a monarch. But the concept is more or less the same as the Dark Enlightenment concept. So let's leave that eventually for future discussions. I will be maybe publishing an article, actually I will absolutely publish an article about what we're discussing today in the coming hours on leozagami.com, because I think it's very important that we understand how these people are manipulating us. When I said that, we as as past members of the Make America Great movement MAGA are used as useful idiots, that is unfortunately the conclusion that we have to make when Peter Thiel is also so close to J.D. Vance, so close to Donald Trump. And the Dark Enlightenment, like I showed you, has also an element of Sabbatean Frankism, because one of the people involved in it is a Sabbatean Frankist.
According to Yarvin, controls society not through laws or force, but through ideology, consensus, and cultural pressure. It is not Orwell's boot stomping on a face. It is soft power that feels like truth. Nick Land, known for his cyberpunk-infused accelerationist philosophy, took Yarvin's ideas and pushed them further. Land gave the movement its name, the Dark Enlightenment. His writings injected a darker, more philosophical edge, tying these ideas to themes of post-humanism, automation, and the collapse of liberal ideals in the face of accelerating technology. Some in this school of thought advocate for exit strategies such as private digital societies, independent city-states, or breakaway corporate enclaves where governance is optimized, not voted on. Others envision a world where technology replaces outdated institutions altogether. It is a blueprint for governance in a time of increasing distrust and systemic breakdown. But what makes the Dark Enlightenment truly unsettling is not just its ideas. It is the mirror it holds up to our current reality. It forces uncomfortable questions. Are we truly free, or are we just choosing between scripted outcomes? Are democratic leaders really accountable, or are they figureheads managed by deeper forces? And if the system is failing, what comes next? These are not conspiracy theories. They are the kinds of questions rising quietly in a culture that feels increasingly unstable. It is important to be clear. The Dark Enlightenment is not a mainstream ideology, and many of its conclusions are controversial and provocative. Critics argue it promotes authoritarianism, social stratification, and a rejection of basic civil liberties. And yet, its critiques of political stagnation, media control, and the illusion of democratic power resonate with growing numbers of people who feel the system no longer serves them. The theory is a window into a radical reimagining of power, one that suggests our current systems might not be sacred, just outdated. You do not have to agree with it, but understanding it might help you recognize where some of the world's deeper currents are pulling. Stay curious, because the future might not look like the past, and some people are already coding what comes next.
Yes, and they are preparing for us something that is a million times worse than anything George Orwell had already predicted in 1984. Let's say that the framework of George Orwell's 1984 is being amplified by these new technologies that Orwell, of course, couldn't know about. But let's see this guy interviewed on the end of American democracy, this Curtis Yarvin, this Sabbatean Frankist backed by Peter Thiel, who is considered this genius. No?
Intellectual godfathers of the so-called new right.
Curtis Yarvin.
Curtis Yarvin.
Curtis Yarvin.
Curtis Yarvin.
Operating in the shadows of the internet, needless to say, is a man called Curtis Yarvin.
This is Curtis Yarvin.
So, Curtis Yarvin. I mean, a guy who the majority of us doesn't really know, but who is very well known amongst the elite. Somebody who is already discussing the end of American democracy.
For years, Curtis Yarvin had been writing online about political theory and relative obscurity.
His ideas were pretty extreme, that institutions at the heart of American intellectual life, like the mainstream media and academia, need to be dissolved. He also believes that government bureaucracy should be radically gutted, and that American democracy should be replaced by what he calls a monarchy run by a CEO.
Monarch is good, it's a neutral term.
But while Yarvin himself may still be obscure, his ideas are not. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance has alluded to his notions of forcibly ridding American institutions of so-called wokeism. And Yarvin has also found fans in the most powerful and increasingly political ranks of Silicon Valley, like Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist turned informal advisor to President-elect Trump.
We are living under FDR's personal monarchy.
Peter Thiel, a Republican megadonor, has called him a powerful historian. On top of it all, Yarvin has become a fixture of the right-wing podcast universe. He's been a guest on the shows of Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk, among others.
Thank you for that lovely intro, Tucker.
I've been aware of Yarvin for years, but always thought of his work as pretty fringe. A lot of what Yarvin has to say is disturbing, and the historical evidence he justifies it with is riddled with exaggeration, distortion, and sometimes just plain inaccuracy. But given that his ideas are now finding an audience with some of the most powerful people in the country, Yarvin can't be so easily dismissed anymore.
When you say to a New York Times reader, democracy is bad, they're a little bit shocked. But when you say to them, politics is bad, or even populism is bad, they're like, of course, these are horrible things.
I'm David Marchese, and here's my conversation with writer Curtis Yarvin.
Now, let's listen to a couple of minutes of this interview. Of course, we can't listen to the whole of it. We might encourage you to go on YouTube and find it so you can listen to the whole thing. But it is important to understand Yarvin by listening to Yarvin.
To my understanding, one of your central arguments is that, America needs to, I think the way you've put it in the past is sort of get over our dictator phobia, that American democracy is a sham, beyond fixing, and having sort of a monarch-style leader, or call it a CEO, or call it a dictator, like that's the way to go. So why is democracy so bad, and why would having a dictator solve the problem?
Let me answer that in, I think, a way that will be relatively accessible to readers of the New York Times. You've probably heard of a man named Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yes.
I do a speech sometimes where I'll just read the last 10 paragraphs of FDR's first inaugural address, in which FDR essentially says to the American people, hey, Congress, give me absolute power or I'll take it anyway. So, did FDR absolutely actually take that level of power? Yeah, he did. And so there's a great piece that I've sent to, some of the people that I know that are involved in the transition, is, there's all sorts of people milling around.
Name one.
There. Name one. Wow. Name one. Well, I definitely know Mark Andreessen, and so I sent this piece to Mark Andreessen, and it's an excerpt from the diary of Harold Ickes, who's FDR's Secretary of the Interior, and it's a little diary entry describing a cabinet meeting in 1933. And what happens in this cabinet meeting is that Francis Perkins, who's the Secretary of Labor, comes in to this meeting and is like, here, I have a list of the projects that we're going to do. FDR personally takes this list, looks at the projects in New York, and is like, this is crap, aren't you doing? Like, humiliates Francis Perkins in the Oval Office or wherever they're having their cabinet meeting. And then at the end of the thing, it's like everybody agrees that the bill would be fixed and then pass through Congress. This is just a picture of FDR acting like a CEO. And so, the question of, was FDR a dictator? What does it mean to be a dictator? What does this pejorative word mean? I don't know. What I know is that Americans of all stripes, Democrats, Republicans, and everyone, except for a few right-wing Republicans, basically revere FDR. And FDR ran the New Deal like a startup.
So, as I understand it, the point you're trying to make is that we have had something like a dictator in the past in American history, and therefore it's not something to be afraid of now. Is that right?
What we see.
So somebody, of course, here in the chat said, I would like to be ruled by a philosopher king. Well, in theory, we could even agree with that. In volume 9 of my confession, which, like I said, I strongly recommended at the beginning of this show, in regards also to this topic, I wrote about the fact that Plato has been enormously influential, and with the concept also of philosopher kings, which has been embraced initially by the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt, is also increasingly present in the World Economic Forum's global elites, which have come to a strikingly similar determination to have something like the philosophy sages, like the Rex degree of the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt that teaches this whole thing. Is this degree that we have in Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati, actually it might be called the degree of the philosopher king, because it's all about creating these philosopher kings. But the problem is they rarely manifest in the way that we have envisioned them. That's the big problem, I find. We might have thought of even of Donald J. Trump until not so long ago as the solution to the swamp, to people who were once in Washington, D.C., doing only their own interests and not the interests of the people. But in the end, we have seen that Trump is simply another swamp creature that is simply wanted to manifest his own legacy in a different way from what we had envisioned. He wants to make his family great again, not America great again. And for that reason, he has embraced also the basic premises of the Dark Enlightenment, which, like I said, wants to constitute the basis for a future or upcoming techno-feudalism. Now, the fact that Yarvin comes from the Sabbatean Frankist Ashkenazi background, his surname Yarvin, it's actually a variant of the Yiddish name Yarvins, and it's meaning friend or dear, but it's no friend or dear to me or to the American people. Curtis Yarvin is somebody who instead works with the elite, is shaping up himself, is helping to shape this new elite. And he has made it very clear in this speech he has given in England.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Unheard Club. For those of you joining us for the first time, I always sound a bit like an air hostess when I do this. A very special welcome to you, and thank you for braving the new season, the wind and rain, to get here and be with us tonight.
Now, somebody was saying Jarvis Irving. No. His surname has to be spelled in the right way. Yarvin. And Yarvin is a surname that started to appear here in the United States, in states like Georgia and New York, only in the early 20th century. And like I said, they come from that Eastern Europe environment, which unfortunately, like I explained very well in my book on Jeffrey Epstein, is also the background of both Epstein as well as Ghislaine Maxwell. It seems that then all these people always get together, that they have always the same ideas. Epstein was himself somebody who believed in the Dark Enlightenment, and that's why he was hanging around with Steve Bannon, who is also a proponent of the Dark Enlightenment.
Tonight, no doubt you'll know our guest already, but I will introduce him anyway. He's a political theorist and, dare I say, provocateur. He is the author of Unqualified Reservations, a kind of extraordinary oblique blog that he wrote under the pseudonym Mencius Moldbug. He is now author of the Grey Mirror Substack, which has a similarly oblique style, I would say. He's the godfather of the Red Pill movement, a kind of leading light in the new right in the US.
Now, this godfather of the Red Pill movement, and we all know, associated with that psyop called the QAnon movement or QAnon. I mean, still there is people who go after QAnon. There is still people who believe in the lies of Donald J. Trump, even if they have become increasingly evident. I don't know how it's possible today to justify what Trump is doing in Iran, the amateur level of warfare that he's really exposing in this latest confrontation, because everything of this confrontation with Iran up until now is completely amateurish. Then we have on the side this Peter Thiel going around making deals with various countries for Palantir. Palantir, part of the Dark Enlightenment, is now officially in bed with the Pentagon. It's just news like from a few days ago. I mean, the fact that Palantir and Pentagon have joined forces, Palantir, Pentagon, let me find it here, so you can check it out for yourself. I mean, we might think of these people as some eccentrics, but when they influence our lives to this level, Pentagon to adopt Palantir AI as core US military system. That means the Dark Enlightenment will be at the core of our military system. It's no longer simply this is a much more serious situation.
And infamously advocates for monarchy. He's not a royalist, rather he's a kind of equal opportunities supporter of absolute power, which is something I'm sure we'll get into this evening. His name is, of course, Curtis Yarvin. Join me in welcoming him to the Unheard Club. Curtis, I'm going to start by reading back to you something that you've written about, which is a very annoying thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. You mentioned on a recent blog post some instructions that Louis XIV gave to his son, and they go a bit like this. Nothing can so securely establish the happiness and tranquility of a country as the perfect combination of authority in the single person of the sovereign. The greatest subdivision in this respect often produces the greatest calamities. So I suppose that's an obvious place to start. Is the civic calamity, or whatever you might call it, that America is facing right now, a fault of democracy?
When you use the word democracy, of course, you're using a very, very loaded and complex word. And, you know, the meaning of that word in our modern world, it's like one of the simplest examples of kind of what's going on here that I ever came up with was simply to examine the words democracy and politics and note that they mean the same thing, but they have opposite emotional valences. And so anything democratic is good, anything political is bad. If we were to democratize foreign policy, that would be good, but if we were to politicize it, that would be bad. So apparently we believe in democracy without politics, which is a rather strange thing to believe in if you think about it. That sort of reminds you, or reminds me anyway, of an interesting fact, which is that some people would say that the least democratic nation on earth is North Korea. But in fact, if you look at the name of North Korea, I mean, and North Korea is very much an absolute monarchy, and I'm happy to talk about why that doesn't exactly apply in the North Korean case. But if you look at the name the official name of North Korea, it's the DPRK, and that is 3 euphemisms for democracy and 1 place name. And so, you know,
it's a democratic republic.
Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Is this why we have a kind of, when people say don't talk about politics over dinner, but no one would ever say don't talk about democracy over dinner?
Sure. And so, you know, democracy has become, you know, which was actually most people don't even know that to the American founders, or at least many of the American founders, the word democracy is a curse word. It's considered extremely harmful. Actually, one of the funniest ironies there, available in the world today is if you go to these pages change all the time. If you go to the Wikipedia page for Athenian democracy, there's an observation by a modern historian that it's very strange that people have been LARPing the system, as we say.
Now, I find it quite weird that figures of the alt-right, so-called alt-right, like this guy, who promoted the dark enlightenment against the liberal world order, are themselves the product of a Sabbatean Frankist family with open familiarity with one of the worst ideologies ever created, communism. I mean, he himself said that his grandparents, paternal grandparents, met in a communist environment in Brooklyn. I mean, come on, guys. These people, and even Trump now, is acting as a Democrat, as a leftist. What he's doing is rejecting everything he promised to his base, his conservative base, and he's simply acting as a Democrat. And he used to be part of the Democratic Party. But now he has also this new twist, this dark enlightenment twist, which, of course, it's gonna be then inherited by who? By people like Rubio and J.D. Vance. Now, J.D. Vance seems lately a little bit, his future seems a little bit uncertain. Anyway, I would like to cite what within the framework of the Dark Enlightenment, what Mark Zuckerberg said. Mark Zuckerberg, open quote, said, "Move fast and break things. Unless you are breaking stuff, you are not moving fast enough." So they move fast. They are trying to move fast. Remember, guys, the roots of technocracy. Technocracy has not been around for one day. Technocracy has been around almost for 100 years. It started to surface in the 1930s. In 1932, scientists and engineers discussed it at Columbia University as they were designing a brand new resource-centric economic system. They thought that capitalism already in the 1930s was on its way out. So the technocracy that actually we are discussing considers the Bible of its thought, this technocracy study course from the 1930s. And I want to cite something from this technocracy study course from the 1930s. Open quote, "Technocracy is dealing with social phenomena in the widest sense of the word. This includes not only actions of human beings, but also everything which directly or indirectly affects their actions. Consequently, the studies of technocracy embrace practically the whole field of science and industry, biology, climate, natural resources, and industrial equipment. All enter into the social picture." This was written by a guy called Hubbard in 1934. Now, there is a necessary requirement for this technocracy the engineers are all disciplined to list the requirements of every project, and technocracy is like we are seeing also with the words of Yarvin, very much anti-democratic. But of course, you know, in your own company, Apple or another company, Elon Musk's Tesla, you can be a dictator. It's your company. You can do whatever you want. However, when the company becomes then a leading factor in the decision-making of your own country because of its technology, because of its AI, then it's a little bit more complex, the situation.
Have been trying to produce, trying to imitate the glories of Athenian democracy. And the funny thing about this, as the historian accurately notes, is that everyone who experienced Athenian democracy in sort of the age of Pericles and beyond, who wrote about it, whose writings we have, thought it was the most terrible system ever. I mean, Athenian democracy literally executes Socrates, the founder of modern philosophy. And so, when you get into kind of running down these Orwellian euphemisms and you get into the question of what does this word mean, democracy, you're getting into sort of the holy of holies, you're getting into sort of a mysterious question. So let me, back up a little bit and focus on, what is the strange thing that Louis XIV means when he says this? Well, even, here in what's kind of a center of monarchy, it's a center of symbolic monarchy. And, we have Charles III going up on stage. He would never dream of saying off with his head. And if he said off with his head,
at least.
Not in public. And if he said off with his head, he would not at all expect to be obeyed. And yet, if you look around you, basically, go home, look around you, you'll notice that everything you have that works was made in a monarchy or by a monarchy or both. So for example, this iPhone. This iPhone was produced by Apple, which is a monarchy. That is, it's a corporation. A corporation is very much the definition of an absolute monarchy. The CEO it's not quite absolute because the CEO is accountable to a board. Sometimes it is absolute. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, is not accountable to anyone. He controls his own board. Elon Musk, I think, controls his own boards. So these are really absolute monarchs. Of course, they're limited by the power of the state. And when you basically look at what Apple is able to do as an absolute monarchy with a CEO, which is just a euphemism for king, it produces this incredible device. Imagine if this incredible device had to be produced by the California Department of Cell Phones. Some kind of cell phone quango, perhaps, in the UK, right? It's comical. You can't imagine it happening. And actually, not only is this device made by a monarchy, if you look at any of the boxes that you get from your Apple product, it will say, designed by Apple in California, made in China. Guess what? There's another monarchy. And so, we live in this strange position where, we're the product of 250 years of thought that absolutely excoriates this political system, excoriates it as much as the Soviet Union excoriated capitalism. And yet, we see these incredible things that could never be done.
Though, just to push
outside of
back
monarchy.
slightly, in a monarchy, there can only be one monarch. That is the nature, of course, of a monarchy. And everyone else has to exist within the monarchist system.
That's right.
In terms of Apple, we know that Steve Jobs was himself a very complex character, very bad relationship with his children, a very
bad person, really.
Bad person in many respects. In Chinese factories for Apple, they have suicide nets underneath the windows to stop factory workers
Indeed.
jumping out. What does that tell us about how it is to live under a monarchy?
It tells us that, the Chinese monarchy or the Chinese system, of course, is a very strange system because it has to deny in many ways what it is, as did the whole Eastern Bloc was a strange system of monarchies that evolved out of the most radical and egalitarian philosophies available. In a way you had, and the 20th century is it's a bad place to look for good monarchies.
It's a bad place to look for good monarchies. Well, this guy is basically the man behind Peter Thiel, behind every coup d'etat and every revolution. There is a strategist that hides, a little bit. Is not so obvious as Peter Thiel. I would say that if Peter Thiel is the betrayer-in-chief of the American populist movement and MAGA, let's say, brought the useful idiots to the table, well, in this case, this guy is a very dangerous influence behind the whole thing. Because most people, like I said, they don't really know that there is an ulterior layer behind Peter Thiel, behind Trump, a layer made of technocrats who don't really care about us. Just to cite Michael Jackson, but then Michael Jackson was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein, so what was he doing there in the first place? Peter Thiel is, if we want to describe it in chess terms, a competitive player. He was already from his very early days ready to join this whole project, which, like you saw also today, has always the same links. Is either the Sabbatean Frankists or the Jesuits, or both together, because that's also, unfortunately, something that we often see. They will advance their strategic moves. We will try to detect them. At times, I'm gonna also write a book about it. Hopefully, people still read, and everything vibrates. But it's important to read, because reading only a page on the internet doesn't really serve the purpose. And to fully comprehend this data-driven technocracy, this the evil behind initiatives like the big beautiful bill, there is nothing beautiful about it. There's nothing beautiful about it. And what Trump has been doing is obviously helping his friends behind the Dark Enlightenment, not us. Rejecting certain things that were promoted by the Enlightenment, that's okay. I can agree with that point. But if I reject one evil to embrace another evil, it doesn't make my life better. I hope that's very clear to all of you today. I want to thank, of course, the sponsors who made possible today's show, this extra show on a Wednesday. Hoping we can bring you many more in the coming weeks. So thank you, Larry Frascella. Thank you, Daniel Estes. Thank you, Elizabeth Oxer. Thank you to all of you who still believe in the work I'm trying to put together here every week, trying to bring clarity through a very difficult and complex world. If you appreciate this show, please subscribe to my channels and put like. God bless you all, guys. I see you on Saturday with another episode of the Leo Zagami Show. 20 years of Illuminati Confessions. This is a new format. We have started in January with Illuminati news, Illuminati Confessions, and more surprises to come.
Illuminati want my mind, soul, and my body.
12,000.
I'm trying to keep it on.